When is it going live? It's live. Yay, there it is. I'm waiting for my feed to pick up, to catch up. Come on, you've got to give me a chance here. It's not the same. Hi guys, it's another Wednesday. It's another coffee with Alistair, coffee and coaching, however you like, but it's different. It's a new set. I know there's nobody there at the moment, but I like to fill this time with complete waffle, ideally. So yeah, I've kind of given us a bit of a different look. This is technically my reading nook, I suppose. So I'll show you those things first, which is while we're killing time, waiting for people to turn up. I've got my notebook, which I'm going to use. Oh, I've lost my space. Which is I need for tonight. There is a couple of books. These are the current books that I'm reading at the moment. One is Northern Shaman. I'm not very far into that one because that's quite a heavy book, that one. And then the one I picked up, or Penny got me the other week, was How to Become More Spiritual by Teresa Brown. So yeah, this is kind of my, like I said, this is my reading nooks where I sit. Altar and tarot cards and stuff are there. Tonight I am going to talk to you about autism and my experience and my journey with autism. To running my own company, supporting people with autism. And it's kind of from two reasons. One is I love autism. I've been working in it for 20 odd years. It was something that captivated me as a school leaver. And I ended up, I still do, run a company to support people with autism. But here's the ulterior motive. I currently have space for either an autistic client life coached or respite. I have respite time available too. So it's kind of there's an ulterior motive to this in that I've got time available for a new autistic client. Well, I have had for 2 years, if I'm honest, but COVID's been here, so we couldn't sort of do anything. So yeah, so currently, if you are, you'd have to be kind of Northamptonshire, so it's not a global thing. Or you know somebody with autism that would perhaps would benefit from some online support, then let me know. Penny is currently working the studio as you like, because I'm sat here in the nook. And if any comments do come up, they're going to come up on my iPad just there, but there'll be a bit of a delay on that. But I'm not anticipating there being that many people here live. If you are here live or you are watching it, please drop a little hello. That's always nice. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about autism in the main part, but I want to talk to you about my week, because last week we spoke about negative spirals and asking for help. And as I said, once you come out of a negative spiral, things are kind of different and they become more positive. You start to stop allowing your mindset to be spiraled down. And since that's happened, things have been better this week. So I've got on top of things this week. There is new stuff for the podcast, kind of set all this stuff up. Worked on some other topics. I've got some other little topics I want to talk to you guys about. I also would like to do a recorded one with a couple of people. I'd like to interview a bloke between the age of 20 and 30 and a lady between the age of 20 and 30. And it would be at the same time. So if you're interested in doing that, get in touch. We're going to be talking about generational differences and kind of how we've perhaps changed over the years. But that's just for that. So anyway, let's get into autism. Let me open my notebook. Let's dive into this. So this, like I said, this is designed for if you've got autism, then great, watch this. There might be some little gems in there. Please excuse me. It's so warm in here. I don't know why. So my experience with autism started, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, so we'll glance over it again. Started at a place called Loch Park Adventure Centre up in Scotland, where I grew up. And that was a outdoor centre. So I was doing kayaking, canoeing, climbing, surfing, archery, that's kayak surfing. And it was like an outbounds place as well. So we'd have everything from corporate team building days to families coming and doing kayaking and canoeing through to special needs groups. And that was the first time I'd ever worked with somebody with special needs. They were predominantly learning disability, some were movement. And I, at the time, didn't know that much about it, just was fairly patient, was happy to help. Do you know what I mean? They were there to have fun on the water and stuff. And it was just a case of making it as safe for that person as it could be, depending on their individual needs. So we do that. I do that for a season, kind of working with the disabled people as they're sort of coming to that. And then I did mention this one before. There was a lad who I helped to do archery, and I was so profoundly moved by his mum's reaction that sort of changed the trajectory of my life. And I wanted to know more then about disabilities and how somebody with a disability gets respite through using their other abilities, or it kind of makes things up. So while working there and some other part-time jobs, I did a diploma in psychology and sociology, because that would give me the basic foundation, I thought, for people. And at the time, the only sort of books I could find on autism were quite clinical books, and they would talk about topics like fridge parenting, and it was mostly men, and it was all very clinical. There was no kind of individual. You were diagnosed with autism, you were autistic. So at the time when I was doing those sorts of studies, there was kind of very little known about it as such, although there was a lot known about it medically. I think the psychological side of it and how you help somebody with autism has changed massively over the last 20 years. So yeah, so the early kind of research that was there came up with all kinds of reasons and the wherefores and things. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but there was a lot of it would blame parents. And it kind of got put with the same as a lot of all disabilities. If somebody's different, they all kind of get bunched together, so you get the disabilities. Later on in life, while I wasn't even working for in any mental health, I was now doing normal jobs and stuff. I became of a lady called Temple Grandin, and she's a famous autistic lady from America. And she'd written a book and she'd done talks and things. So I got a hold of some of this information, and that really shed a light on it, because it was able to get exactly what autism is described by the person that's got it, and the strategies that she'd used to overcome things that she found difficult being autistic. And I found that quite inspirational. There was another book I read at the time called Stand With Me in the Rain, or Come Stand With Me in the Rain, or something like that. And that describes the same sort of thing as rather than trying to change this person because they like standing in the rain and generally people don't, go and stand with them in the rain, go and experience what they are experiencing, and then you can judge sort of logic. So it was that kind of stop trying to change me, come and stand with me in the rain sort of logic. And it was, again, that kind of was good. But all of these studies and stuff were they were only just for my own research purposes, really. At the time when I was reading this, I'd got no plan to work with autism or to work in mental health. At the time, I was working for, well, I wasn't. I was on my way down here, so I was Tandy's and then other jobs and then National Grid. And working at National Grid kept me there for sort of 7 or 8 years. So I didn't do anything for mental health there. But once I left, I got made redundant from there. That was then my opportunity to get back into the area where I wanted to work, which was mental health and autism. So let me just have a quick read. So in effect, what we've effectively done there is about the first sort of 10 years from me leaving school to my first job with the National Autistic Society. But I hope you guys have got your coffee. I hope you're enjoying it. I'm looking over here. It says I've got two, so there is a other person watching, which is brilliant. Like I said, I'm only ever looking for one. I was chuffed to bits. Last week's video was watched by, I think it was 15 people, got 10 subscribers. It's all slow progress, but it's all going well, so it's good. Right, let's get back into it anyway. So at this point, I decide I'm going to go back and work for, I get a job with the National Autistic Society, the NAS, as we'll refer to them. And they're a massive charity, the kind of the leading charity for autism. And I worked with them for about a year, working with varieties of, because autism's always described as being on a spectrum. So you're on a spectrum from kind of I'm assuming their terminology is still the same nowadays, kind of low functioning through to high functioning, and then the realms of what they call Asperger's. I know it's slightly different in America, it's slightly different. I don't know about any other countries, but as far as the UK is concerned, as far as I know, there's the autistic spectrum. The higher end of it is your kind of Asperger's end. And that tended to be where my business kind of sat. Wasn't quite that level. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't sort of working with people like Rain Man, which is a kind of, it's an impression that people always have about autism. They always sort of say the same things, or what's their talent, what are they gifted at, what they're interested in, can they count cards, and all this sort of stuff. And you kind of go, no. One guy I know collects Pokemon, he's really good. It's whatever they're interested in. Current client really likes tanks. So if you asked him something about tanks, he could tell you which model was used when. But that's no different to my interest. If somebody was to ask me about psychology or dogs, I have an interest in it, so I know the information. The differences are where it starts to get into where they can remember things that are even more than what the kind of average person can do. And those people are not the common kind of autistic person. Not every autistic person is Rain Man. So while working for the NAS, they're an enormous charity. They're, like I said, a leader in things when it comes to do with autism and Asperger's. They hold regular seminars, and the services they were providing were good. But I spotted a bit of an issue. And it's one that I don't know whether or not it's something that's been addressed now, or if it's still the same. I honestly don't know. But when it comes to the kind of lower functioning autistic people who need sort of stimulation, like stimulation rooms as such, well, they're not cluster stimulation rooms, they're sort of like rooms where there's things moving, or there's bubbles, or there's objects for them to see. That side of things, the NAS couldn't have been any better. They had the best place for the bean bags, people could go and chill. There was ways that the staff could help people. There was never anything that I sort of seen that I thought, yeah, that seems a little bit, well, that's not catered for. Not at all. It was, the people were really looked after. And those that were the lower functioning had productive, interesting days. And the majority of this time is respite. It's to give parents or the carer some time away from being needed by that person. And that's the same as what I do for respite. So I currently have one client that I see for three sessions a week. We do exercises, we go and play table tennis. He has a relatively serious mobility issue. Well, I say relatively serious, very serious mobility issue. So we have sort of minimal exercise that I have to do. And then the majority of the time is playing PlayStation with him, or talking about the computer, or films, or if he's bought a new bobblehead. It's general run-of-the-mill stuff for him to get some social interaction. And it gives an opportunity for his mum to go, well, sometimes, most of the time she goes to the garden centre, to be fair, bless her. But they can go off and do whatever they want to do. And I asked her tonight just to give me a quote as to, the sessions. And she put, Tom looks forward to the sessions. He enjoys spending time with a person of similar age, play PlayStation 5 games, and let him watch with like the one-player games. And as far as his mum's concerned, she knows he's safe, happy, and contented, and she can go off and do what she needs to do. And that is fundamentally what that role is. So anyway, back to the Autistic Society. So, like I said, I knew that they were looking after the kind of more complex autistic people. That was catered for very well. But I spotted a little bit of a loophole, and it started to kind of come in when the lads are about 17, sort of 16, 17, because the process changes from child services to adult services when they hit 18. And then all the funding changes, the government's role changes, what they're entitled to changes, and the companies that they can deal with change. And what I mean by that is the NAS had a situation where one of their lads was going to be 18. At that point, his money would stop, and it would take approximately 2 to 3 weeks to get that sorted out. Now, in the interim, he's got to find ways of paying for the services that he's kind of in. Now, like I said, I don't know if this is still the same now or if it's different now. Hopefully it'd be different now. That would be a bit bad if it's not. But effectively what you get is a situation where, to quote the Batman line, the person ages out, and they age out into adult services. And that's where the next bit, let me just check my notes actually. Oh, yeah, I missed a bit actually in my notes. I'm going to circle back a little bit, because while I was working at National Grid, I did loads of studying into canine behaviour and the social interactions between humans and dogs. And the reason there's a correlation between this is because dogs are quite rigid in thought. They're quite, they like routines, and that rigidity of language and routine is very similar to people with autism, that rigidity of thought. Anything you say can be sort of taken literally. And I'm not comparing the two, but I'm comparing the psychology as such. So for that period of time while I was working, training dogs to getting sort of working with getting dogs into houses, there's a definite correlation between seeing the expectation of a dog owner that doesn't marry the ability of the dog. And this is where I kind of drew the correlation, because society has expectations of everybody. If you're disabled, the expectations change and your environment can be modified to a certain degree. But autism doesn't work the same way. Autism isn't obvious. It doesn't have a chair. It doesn't have crutches. It's internal. So other than some small characteristical changes, the person you're going to look at with autism looks exactly the same as everybody else. The only thing that's going to be slightly different is their response to the world. So like I said, that was my correlation, is between, it's that rigidity of thought and being able to kind of change the environment so that the autistic person knows what the boundaries are, what the sort of logic is, what the reasons are for doing stuff. God, I'm getting through this fairly quickly actually. I've got no comments. This could be a little quick half an hour show, this one. I might slow down a little bit. How long have I been on? 20 minutes. Yeah, it'll be all right. So yeah, so like I said, so the NAS provided that excellent service for people with autism. But then at the point when they aged out, the services didn't really change. What you get then is a teenage because like I said, majority of this autistic people are male. So you've now got a group of 18 plus blokes who probably want to do things that 18-year-old blokes do, or varying degrees of what they want to do. But you've got to be able to do it in a way that they're comfortable with it. And that can be the trickiest bit, is creating the mindset for it. And that's where care sometimes doesn't work, because what a 20-year-old autistic lad probably doesn't need is a 50-year-old female carer to take him bowling. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some excellently great, fun 50-year-old carers out there. But in my experience with the lads that I worked with, that's not what they wanted. They wanted similar. They wanted to be working with somebody as part of their peer group. So although I was sort of older than one of my clients when I had the company, he was quite young when I took him on. There was enough of, not enough of an age gap for it to be massively different if we went out for a drink as such, because we did on one of his sessions. And it's having that kind of, I mean, I've been referred to as kind of rent a brother, hire a friend. They're just simple logic. And it's simply a case of, with a care or respite plan done for that, what that person likes, they know how the session's going to run. If the autistic person needs to get used to dealing with change or going into work in a new environment, all of those things can be catered for. I regard myself pretty highly when it comes to setting up a personal autistic plan for what you want to do. So like I said, I've already spoken about one guy that I work with on a regular basis. The other two were the two, they left the company a few years ago, one of which I still talk to. I'd like to plan a trip to Texas with him, but we're a long way off from doing that. So yeah, let's talk about, so person number one, their sessions were life coaching and respite. So built into their sessions were respite time, so films, holidays, and that could be week-long holidays or a day session, whatever it is. It's considered respite because there's no structured, formal kind of logic to it. It's not educational. And then he would have life coaching sessions. And in those, I had made folders that cover everything he's going to need to live independently. And we just worked through them a bit at a time. So some of the folders were to do with your house, so safety of chemicals, cleaning routines, security, locking door, kind of everything that we take for granted living in a house, that kind of that routine that you have. All of those things needed to be put in place so this guy could see it. Anything to do with the bins, the council, the gas, the electric, getting the bus where his nearest bus places were, independent travel, applying for jobs, job interview techniques. All of these things were in different folders. And over the space of 3 years, he worked through them. And a coaching plan, dependent on the person's autism, can be anything from 12 months to 3 years. That's entirely sort of driven by the person. So what I'm saying is, although it's great to have carers going out to help people with autism, and it does get them out and about, because autism is such a personal, individual diagnosis, I think we miss a trick in not having personal, individually tailored coaches like myself. God, if only I could multiply myself and do some clones. I could set up my own franchise within a franchise. But like I said, I hope you guys are enjoying it. This one's a bit more historical, I suppose. It's kind of my journey with autism. It's not your characteristical kind of, I'm making words up now, talking about mental health. But autism does have its elements of the mental health side. Because autism covers a wide spectrum of aspects of autism that can be affected. It's not just a case of literal language or rigidity of routines. It could also be sounds, touches, noises and sounds are the same thing, bravo. Could be textures. The things that will pop up with kids could be tags in the back of collars. I've worked with kids that would only wear their t-shirts inside out because of the seams on them. It can have so many different aspects. Lights, different coloured lights can have a different effect. And some of these, all of that stuff is classed as hypersensitivity. Some of these things can be really debilitating. When you're trying to work with a person with autism and then they sort of go to college, and let's say, for instance, the college has got planned that they're doing a particular topic, and then it's lunchtime, and then after lunch they're doing another particular topic. But then the tutor decides to change their mind because for whatever reason, something else has changed. So you come back after lunch, and I was supporting this autistic lad, and the course plan's changed. Now, all of a sudden, he has absolutely no idea what to do because the plan has changed. And that rigidity of thought can be really debilitating for a person. It just stops them in their tracks. Then he doesn't know how to deal with it. So we then start to spiral. And this, similar to last week's sort of negative spiral, this is more sort of panicking spiral. What do I do? I've got no choice. I didn't know I was going to be doing that. Now I've got to do that. And that rigidity of thought takes time, it takes practice. So in the same way that a person who's getting rehabilitation to learn to walk again after some accident, a person with autism might need to learn ways to cope with change. And this is what I've spoken about this before in my podcasts, but I regard change as choice. Oh, I've got a comment. Bear with me 1 second. How do you help autistic people with depression or other mental health problems? Good question. Right. Mental health and depression are all based on the same things. They'll all revolve around you. So your depression is around things that you're depressed about for you. So an autistic person having the awareness to know that their condition is possibly debilitating in some way will cause depression in the same way that a person with low self-esteem has. So technically it's the same thing. The difference is with the ability to verbalize what the problem is. So a classic example from the people I've worked with is you hit a buffer. They'll be talking and they'll be able to communicate what they want to say and what's going on until they suddenly hit the point of they say, I don't know. And the words I don't know crop up a lot when it comes to mental health. When you hit that bottleneck point where somebody simply says, what do you want me to do for you? I don't know. And that's what I regard as the shutdown point. Because once the person hits that I don't know, it is kind of pointless you talking to them because they're not taking anything else in. It is pointless them saying anything else because they're not going to get anything else positive. So at that point, when they say, I don't know, I would share a comfortable silence and explain in my mannerisms that that's okay. It's okay to have absolutely no freaking idea what to do next. Just take a minute, just sit and stop for a moment. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. And like I said, it takes practice, and it takes the same as somebody learning to walk from an accident, the same as somebody learning to be more fluid with their thoughts and not be so rigid and against change. But they're not easy things to do. And when it comes to depression, you've got to start boiling it down at that point. And it doesn't matter if you're autistic or not. Depression is fundamentally the same thing. You just have a different set of reasons that you're depressed about. So I think the crucial point with an autistic person that is suffering from depression and anxiety that isn't just based around their ASD. It's drawing those two correlations. Having autism is one complex issue. Having depression and anxiety is another. They are not two in the same thing. And I would say to work with somebody with, I have worked with somebody with anxiety and depression to an extent with autism, and it was no real difference than working with a person who's neurotypical, other than the words used to explain it. And that's the main difference, is understanding your client, or understanding the customer, the person who's got autism, understanding how they do things, understanding how they're interested in things, what they're interested in, how do they communicate, how do they understand things. And that can be massively different, all the way through to people you wouldn't expect to have a social issue. I'm thinking of, I can't remember her name, Sue Bow or whatever her name. I can't remember her name now from the X Factor. I think I might have said the wrong name there from something else, but her autism didn't come out really until afterwards, and people could see the levels of anxiety that were there. And that's a massive thing for somebody with autism, to be that vulnerable up on the stage. But because she got the confidence in her ability, which is where some autism is good, because they get an element of confidence and arrogance with an ability. So if we take that she's got the confidence and the ability for singing, I've not read her story or anything, or a book or an autobiography, but I would expect that, providing her travel there, her rehearsal, her recording, her setup, her go home, as long as all of that goes okay, everything's peachy. It would be if something changed inside that you have a potential problem with, like, the rigidity of things. And that's where I seen the gap with the NAS. So effectively what I did was I set up my own limited company that was designed to provide life coaching or respite to males with Asperger's over the age of 17. So once you were at that age group, and then it's a case of sit down and work out what you want to do. What do you want to do? Do you want a house? Do you want to get your own job? What are the limitations? What does your autism involve? And it's really a case of finding out where the client is on their sort of goal structure, if you like. To put this in perspective, it can go from, and this could have been a person without any autism. I worked with a gentleman who lacked confidence in social situations. He lacked confidence when it came to potentially conflict. So anywhere where there was going to be a discussion about who is in charge and things like that. And the idea was that we put together either a 3 to 5 year plan to aid this guy to go from, because he was studying, academically very smart, socially, as far as hygiene and habits and things like that go. And I'm mentioning that because it's blokes. Us blokes can be a bit slack with that. He was very good at understanding dietary requirements and his personal human needs, if you like. The dilemma was going from the comfort zones of his room and his house and college to the bigger social things. So nightclubs, pubs, jobs, interviews, shopping centres, getting your own haircut, going and buying your own clothes, all of these things. And he, in his defence and his mum's defence, they had tried doing it together and his mum was brilliant, massive support. Couldn't have done it without him. But there comes a time, I think, in most blokes' lives where we don't want that. We don't want that mum help. And I think that's a little bit where if an autistic person gets a lady carer, we're in that realms of kind of being helped by your mum a little bit. And in my experience, the autistic people I worked with, they wanted that kind of level male peer, kind of a person to work with. Right, let me just check my notes. So the National Autistic Society would have these clients, so similar clients to what I had, and I'd arrive there, and one of the parents would be saying something about timetable changes. And being that I was just staff, I didn't know anything about this. And the parent saying to me the first time, you know, working with autism, you really can't be changing the rota this quickly to close to a session. And I sort of had no idea. I didn't know about a rota change. I've been on the call for the week, as far as I knew, when I got my rota. But they hadn't. They'd had a phone call that morning to say it was going to be somebody else. Now, it seems really picky, but although the session is still going ahead, the autistic customer was expecting another person. So they've geared themselves up for the kind of person that is, for the kind of session they're going to have. And then it's changed. And it's still a stumbling block for an autistic person to have that sudden change when they're expecting person A and it ends up being person B. And that happened 3 or 4 times a month easily with a particular client. And it would get on their nerves. It would get on his mum's nerves because she would have to deal with the backlash of how to break the news to him that it's changed. And sometimes it was a change for the better, sometimes a change for the worst. But those kind of low, and I get that you can't, you know, there's always going to be stuff that happens, changes and emergency stuff that happens. But on the whole, it was quite frequent and it got frustrating. And that, again, backs up where I seen with my company was a case of it just me. The dilemma being that, you know, if I'm off, I'm ill. But there is still that it's going to be one person. This is the plan. This is how it's going to work. And this is what we're going to work on, or this is where we're going to go. But I always used to not trick as such, but when it comes to things like rigidity of thought or change, we'd have sessions where we'd want to go to cinema. So one guy would go to cinema, another guy, I did sessions where we were sort of learning about sort of map reading and negotiating around cities. So we did trips to Birmingham, London. On the trips where we went to the cinema, I would accidentally choose the wrong time for the film. So I'd make a mistake. Now it's kind of up to the client to A, handle me appropriately because I've made a mistake. The other is to either say, okay, what's the alternatives? Do we have an alternative film on starting about now? Do we have an alternative location? Could we go and watch that film at another location? Or do we scrap it and we go and do something completely different? Or option 4, do we just go and sit in the car for a bit while you process what you want to do? And all of those choices are valid. But having the client in that situation choose the one for them can be quite tricky, and it takes practice. In the version when we went to London, my phone went dead. So we were using my phone as maps to get to the next train station, and my phone switched off. So I had to ask the guy I was with, I was like, right, dude, you're going to have to get maps on your phone now and sort of guide us because I don't know what's going on. My phone's gone dead. And now it's up to him to sort of figure it out. And we did really well. I mean, don't get me wrong, we went to London, I got us lost, and then he managed to find our way to the set for Sherlock, the little calf, I can't remember what it's called now, the little calf in Sherlock, the good Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch one. And we found that calf, and we had some photos and stuff done there, and we've been around different plots in London, but it was designed for what he needed. So every autistic session, life coaching session, is tailored for what that person needs. And those little bits of tailoring can be very, very subtle. Like I said there were two different clients dealing with two different kinds of changes, and they both dealt with them very differently. Because one, for the map changes, we ended up traveling the world and traveling to New Zealand and going around the Lord of the Rings set. And as a person that I worked with quite closely to build his confidence up, to go and get his own haircut or do part-time work in a charity shop and things like that, to then sort of be able to sort of sit back and watch him neck a couple of tequila shots with some friends he's made from Texas that we all made, we're all on the same trip, and enjoy himself and relax as part of a peer group of friends. You kind of just sit there and go, yeah, my work here is done. It's perfect. Spot on. Well done, dude. You've done it. And all it was just 3 years of gentle coaxing, sometimes not so gentle, don't get me wrong. I mean, I have the patience of a saint, but if I think somebody's taking the piss, I'll tell them. So it's very balanced in its response. And I'm also very aware of how I speak to an autistic client. I don't want to make things worse, but I also don't want to do it for them. They've got to figure out their own coping strategies. I'm there to help them when they fall. I'm not there to carry them. And that is part of, I do say that a lot. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that. I'm sure it is. And that. Becoming aware of my own language, thinking about it. Because, I forgot what I was going to say now. I lost my train of thought because of that. That's what it was. When you've got a disability, when somebody's got a disability, it's very easy to get hung up on the dis part of it. It's the disability. So somebody who's got autism. Now, bear in mind, we've got masses of spectrum in autism. So there was a time years ago where somebody with autism, they were regarded as the least employable people on the planet, which is a horrendous statistic. But now, with the way processes work in certain industries, an autistic person could be an absolute benefit for whatever it is that they're particularly good at, could be an absolute massive benefit to your company. So that kind of logic is out the window. But I don't like people who will use their disability as well as a reason to not do stuff. So for instance, I've worked with and met plenty of people with what they'll class themselves as Aspergic, and they'll have other traits where they're arrogant, they're narcissistic, they're always convinced they're right. So what I'm trying to say is, within autism, there is the spectrum there to be quite low functioning, disabled, all the way through to very high functioning. But I have worked with people from all disabilities, to be fair, that can be an absolute knob. Just because somebody's got a disability doesn't mean that they're a nice person struggling with a disability. And I think this is something that people expect, that somebody with a disability is going to be patient or is going to be more tolerant of stuff. And in my experience, it's completely the reverse. But I've also had it in the same way as when I've been standing there with an autistic person at the bar or in a restaurant, and the person might be a particularly mobile autistic person, so they might have twitches or movements or sort of bounces and sort of things that they do, and people will stare. And if you're with an autistic person and they become aware of that, that can be a tricky thing to overcome, because going back to that comment that came up to do with anxiety and depression, if you feel that you look the same as everybody else, but you know you've got a disability in the same way as mental health is so hidden. How do I tell you I have a disability of autism? And then what do I tell you that you need to do to change anything because of my disability? All before you've even seen me. And I mean that in the logic of, if you see a person coming towards you with a wheelchair, you know they need a ramp, they've got a wheelchair. But seeing a person walking towards you with autism who might be doing kind of rhythmical movements or rocking on a curb or a door frame and things, that will get kids' attentions, and people will stare and look, and that itself for the autistic person can be demoralizing, for the best of a better word. So going back to that point, to do with depression and anxiety, being fully aware of your disability gives you the ability to overcome it, but it also gives you the ability to be swamped by it sometimes and not feel that you have got to get it under control. So yeah, so that's my journey with autism. I've sort of started right the way back as a teenager working with, because in Loch Park it was actually a thing called Rural Skills was the project. And it's something I have mixed views on. I'm all for people volunteering, but I do think disabled people get used a lot for volunteering for free work. They're getting work experience, but somebody somewhere is getting a financial gain. So sometimes I think it's a little bit swings balance, perhaps goes the wrong way with certain things that disabled people get asked to do and help with. So we kind of go, in that 20 years, we go from being told that if you've got autism, you're kind of unemployable. It's because of fridge parenting. You don't want to be touched or hugged, or if things change, you'll smash the place up. All the way through to people who can be Aspergic and win the X Factor. And I'm fairly certain, I mean, I will name a couple of obvious ones. I mean, Facebook, the owner of Facebook, he's autistic. There is so many people in that, at that level, business managers, bank managers, directors of companies that have those elements of being on the spectrum, whether they knowingly know it or potentially not, because they do say that everybody is on the spectrum somewhere. But I've never firmly believed that. I've always thought that was a bit of a term to create inclusivity. But I think it waters down the necessity for people with autism to get greater help. I mean, don't get me, I've spoken to MPs about getting people into employment in Northamptonshire. That got me nowhere. He couldn't do a thing. So it all becomes about the person and me. So of all the clients I've had, like I said, I've travelled around the world with one, overcome massive amounts of stuff. The other guy now lives independently. So effectively, a bit like, you know, your kids grow up and they move out and go and live on their own and they're independent to an extent. That's kind of what they did. And I think that's awesome. That's what the company was set up for. It wasn't set up to constantly be taking all of their care budget into a load of business admin costs. It was there for them to do respites. The funding that they got meant that later in life, they rely less now on the government because they're better equipped for self-provision. And that's kind of the point, is being self-sufficient as a person, whether it's mental health or autism. Get in touch. Like I said, this was a bit of an advert. I hope you guys like the set. I'd be interested to see what you think. We've got a few random spider plants kicking about the house because they seem to grow like triffids. My hair has got absolutely battered because it's so warm in this lounge. Next week I'm going to put a fan on, I think. But yeah, that's my journey with autism, and it's still ongoing. I still, like I said, I still work with an autistic client for respite, and I currently have 2 full days available for respites or life coaching for an autistic client. Sorry, itchy foot. So yeah, so it's a bit of an advert, really. Like, share, subscribe if you know of somebody that's got autism and you think that it would benefit, or if you yourself are autistic, get in touch. There's not everything has to be done face to face. We can video chat stuff, but that's me. That's autism, and I hope you enjoyed it. I have. Any comments, any questions, by all means, feel free to put them in the comment section. And I hope to see you next week. Hopefully Penny's hovering over the end live. So I will see you next week. Penny, cut.